I'm glad you woke up and clapped. I'm sure thrilled that you're here. So thanks for livening up the crowd.
I'm sure if the crowd agrees with everything we've said, we've been boring. So our goal would be to kind of challenge you a little bit and get you outside your comfort zone.
Perfect. It's easy to do that. So, no, we're exploring some new ground, and we're really excited you're here. By way of introduction, I know a lot of people know you're the chairman emeritus of Cisco, but you have your own venture firm now, which you have let me know is not your classic venture capital company. You are a mentor, an identifier of companies and leadership in those companies that are taking them to an inflection point. And that's what we want to sort of drill down on, because I think we all think that we're in an industry that is at an inflection point. And Umesh, when did we meet? Something like 3 years ago.
3 years ago.
And we were spelling out what would be sort of the ideal platform for automated speech processing.
Correct.
But you begin looking at these concentric circles of other technologies around analytics, around big data gathering and biometrics. They're all in there.
Absolutely.
And you deserve a lot of credit for bringing that all together. And also having John join us here. So we're very thankful. But John, the opening question really is, it's kind of why now, but it's more than that. It's what have you seen in this industry that, like, Opus has sort of taken pains to put it under what we call the conversational commerce umbrella, but we know that there's a lot of elements that improve people's ability to take advantage of technologies to carry out what they do every day. And I'm wondering if you're seeing the same thing, and how do you see this community that we're cultivating here?
Well, if you think about the trends over time, and remember when Cisco was founded, there were 1,000 connections to the internet. And when I said the internet was going to change the way the world works, lives, learns, and plays, and people said, you're a router company. And I said there'd be 1 billion connections. They said that's wrong by a large amount. It was clearly too conservative and all the above. All of us know when you catch market trends, the market gets excited, and then they say it's not going to happen, and about then you hit your inflection point. My skills are identifying market transitions, building great teams to go about it, and then having the courage to put the gas all the way down through the inflection point. And you won't always be right, and you have to view it as a portfolio play, but you articulated it very well. What are the biggest trends going on in technology that are going to cause changes in business model changes? They're going on in a big way. AI, front and center. Every CEO knows she or he has to do something here, but they have no idea what in most cases. Interesting enough, they're looking to the small companies who can do the innovation and move faster to partner with them in a way that hasn't occurred. Speech, and you're talking to the person that said voice would be free 15 years ago with Kara Swisher, all things digital. And I was just with her last week. I was wrong. Speech wasn't just going to be free. Speech was going to move down on the platform with data and video being more important. And then speech is now coming back as the primary interface. Whether you're in the car, whether you're in business, et cetera. AI-enabled, machine learning-enabled, et cetera. And then big data, bringing it all together. So you can do the recognition, whether it's for security reasons or others. So all three of these technology inflection points are happening at the identical time that business transformation is occurring. So that's why now, in my opinion.
Exactly. And then, well, what about Unifor attracted? Where did that map into?
It's a great question, because when we met almost 2.5 years ago, I was still not sure about voice. I was getting to know a company called Pindrop in Atlanta, voice fraud recognition, tremendous momentum, just like Umesh, VJ, their world-class CEO. But I was still getting a feel for what the future of voice would be and the implications, and met him at an MIT Under 35 award group where they picked the top Under 35 CEOs in all of India. And I had a chance to meet with who MIT thought were the top 8, and Umesh was one of the 8. And in the session there, candidly, he asked the best questions. He was also the most effective one following up.
Let that be a lesson to you.
And I wish I could tell you he had me at a low. It was not. We met 12 times over the next year about video, et cetera. And then finally, I got the correlation. A little bit earlier stage than I normally go into. but one that was aligned for a rapid inflection point in growth. And so that's what I liked. Market transition, world-class CEO, and then customers told me this is the company I should invest in.
Yeah. And that gets to, clearly it has to be grounded, and this is something we're discovering. The technologies are maturing. There's some issues in whether enterprises and individuals are able and how they're going to incorporate it into workflows. But one thing, that's going to drive it is that there's real world use cases and real customers. And I'm hoping Umesh can cast a little light on what you're seeing lately in terms of the real value to people.
Absolutely. I think that's a good way to start the conversation, because one of the things that my team and I have been thinking about hard as, over the last 10 years, and believe it or not, we've been at this for 10 years, and you're right, we're beginning to feel the inflection point as well. John and I were just talking upstairs, is that, we've done a bunch of these. First came speech recognition, how do you get machines to converse? Then came natural language processing, natural language understanding, and now with AI and conversational, the game's shifted dramatically. And so we've sort of stepped back and said, how do we measure the impact we're causing to the enterprise, because we're an enterprise play, and more interestingly, how do we measure the impact we're causing to the consumer with any of these, right? And so as I distill it, I look at it in three ways, right? I look at it and saying, here's a field of artificial intelligence with speech and natural language, et cetera. The first thing it's doing is doing the things that we human beings know how to do, but probably doing it better, doing it faster, et cetera. Call it automation, right? So as an example, if you think about a global insurance company that works with us, and you call them in Japan or China or Korea or India, Kushi would answer your phone on the IVR, or an Ellen would answer your phone, et cetera. And what's happening here is we identified the repeated mundane tasks that call center representatives were involved in, and said, today the technology can absolutely do these, and we can have these people who are skilled to do the more complex conversations. To the consumer, it was about, if I'm calling to check when's my next premium due, or I'm just shopping around, I'm not sure if I have made up my mind, but I want to quickly understand what this product is about and how much would it cost. I shouldn't be told your call is important to us and you're next in the queue and it's a 4-minute wait. I just want a quick answer. When I'm ready, I'll come back. And so that's the first category, that getting these technologies to drive automation which have consumers impacted and drive bottom line impact on the enterprise. That's a win-win. The second one is having AI and speech do things that human beings do but could be tremendously error prone as what we do, right? So think about, again, the customer service industry, the industry that I'm intimately aware of, is all of the representatives that work with us in the industry, as they hang up the phones, they still have to do what's called the after call work. They have to summarize the call in the CRM and so on. And that's truly important, because what they summarize becomes available for analytics later. When companies want to know what a customer is saying about us, why are they calling, it's that summary that's important. And given the nature of the game, as we dug in, we realized that, because the reps are on a treadmill, they want to pick up the next call so fast and they're incentivized to do it, et cetera, we are hardly ever getting very precise summaries in the system. And so we said, how about we get AI, which is anyways listening in. We have speech recognition, we have transcription, we have natural language, et cetera, to automate the after call work. That saves the time on the rep. They can focus on the thing that they like to do, is pick up the phone and speak to customers and address their needs. The enterprises get precise data coming out of an automated system. And so this is an example of AI sort of helping do things that could be error prone if humans kept doing it over and over. And the third one, which is most interesting for me, is we are now at a stage, and if you look at the stack, you say there's tactical automation, then there's strategic automation, which I just spoke of. And the final one, frontier, is transformational. How could AI help us do things that we as human beings could not do because of mental limitations or physical limitations and so on? That's the most interesting. So think about our customer in Vietnam is the largest lender and the largest bank in the country, and they're lending to a population. They're just growing like crazy. It's $7 to $8 billion right now, and they're lending to a population which is lower mid-income or poorer. And that's why it's a huge growing market for them. And so these are consumers who don't have electronic aids that every month they do an auto pay and auto repay on the loan. So this bank has 5,000 people employed just to call the borrowers every month to say that, your repayment is due. How can we make it easier for you? Should we come and pick it up? Should I schedule an appointment at the branch, et cetera? There's 5,000. Now, the challenge to the CEO was, I'm scaling. This 5,000 will become 7,000, 8,000, 10,000. Because that's the humming machine. I need to do this, and there's a science behind it. They figured out that if they don't, then their NPAs go up, et cetera. But here's the deal. We work with a bunch of universities. That's how Uniphore was formed inside a lab in a university 10 years ago. And today, research said that we as human beings have over 70 emotions that we can convey just by modulating our voice. I can convey excitement today about a new technology, or I can convey displeasure.
My wife can probably do 120.
There you go.
And I know what each one means.
That's real intelligence, not artificial.
It'll get there.
And so we made algorithms look at when you call somebody and say, your repayment is due, and somebody says, oh yeah, I'm aware, but this week I'm traveling, I'm going to be probably 2 days late, versus somebody say, oh yeah, I'm aware, I'm going to pay you guys. There's intent in the emotion.
Absolutely.
And so if you think about it, there's no way for a rep to be trained on John and his wife's emotion, to be trained on how people react to a certain question and so on. And so, but you can now have AI be listening in quietly and say, there's more than 90% probability this person will repay. Don't bother calling them again. Focus on this one, where the intent shows that there's less than a 50% probability. So beginning to drive real impact on the enterprise. For the consumer who was ready to repay, was genuine. You don't get a second call, so it's dignity and good customer experience, and so on. So it's some of these real use cases that we are seeing and at scale around the world, not just in North America, but Asia and Europe,
right,
which is why we believe there's an inflection point. These cases are real, the values are real, it's measurable, and people are coming out and saying we benefited from it.
It's getting there. And so we've been trying to track it and put sort of an umbrella around it that says the idea is to be predictive and be able to respond accurately at scale and consistently, because that's one of the advantages. It's been really hard. I mean, one of the stories you'll hear in the next day, and a lot of the stories you'll hear, is how an insurance company is doing it, how the largest, how the Chinese version of eBay is incorporating it. This is stuff that people are using every day. But companies are having trouble, both the solution providers and the enterprises that are interweaving this into their workflows, both their employee and their customer workflows, are turning increasingly to the smaller companies to provide the answers. I was going to ask John, what do you think the long-term implications are? What can we expect from the behemoths, and what are the role of the small innovative companies looking ahead?
For the first time in my career, and unfortunately I've been around quite a few decades, good news and bad news, and I've seen almost every market transition. I've made a lot of the mistakes and successes. But it's the first time I've ever seen the large enterprise customers willing to be so dependent upon a startup. And I always, whenever I see a trend, I connect the dots, and then I say, all right, what has changed? And what has changed is the large companies often are not able to attract the millennials who will be as creative. The companies are moving too slow on the changes because they can no longer be done in silos. They have to be done across the organization. And they are willing to take risk and partner with startups. And remember, 70% of startups will go out of business. Even the top VCs that are really good on execution, 3 out of 10 will go out of business. These large enterprise customers know that, but they realize the benefit is so large on innovation to partner with startups in a unique way. Now, the problem is that startups have to learn to interface to these large companies in a way that doesn't burn their engineering resources, and they don't work for 2 years and don't get a win-win. So it's a dance that's learning to be done. But if I were to use just 2 examples in the related field of AI, one stealth and one still announced, you have a Spark Cognition, 200 people in Texas on security and AI automation, and they've got a huge number of the top AI people in the nation, and Boeing partners with them to redo the whole FAA architecture for unmanned aviation 50-50 partnership. You suddenly have large financial institutions for a company that's still stealth in New York. Average order is 10 to 15 million per order. And you have the CEO involved in each one of these. And with Umesh, I always judge, you watch by, it's important for me to feel the market transitions there, and it's important for me to make a judgment on the CEO. Can she or he really be world-class? Do they want to be coached? Is there a chance really to have explosive growth here and be the number one player in their segment of the industry? But it really comes down to what the customers say. And when the customers started to say, this is what this company was doing, and suddenly a ramp rate where we thought it would be a million the first year in the US, and within a couple months we realized that's off by an exponential amount. When the customers start to say, this is what gets exciting, that's the key. So for each of you, as you think about how you incorporate this into your business, the key is how do you mine the capabilities and the innovation that startups bring, understanding their strengths and limitations, including some will fail. And for those of you who are startups, you have to think about how you interface to these large companies in a more effective way, and don't get carried away with over-promising. It's so important to under-promise and over-deliver. 101, that's how you build trust.
Yeah, absolutely. But implicit in there is who are you selling to in the business organization? Because we've been looking at, if it's customer care, are we talking to the contact center people? And they're like, no. Or are there these new chief customer experience officers? Or is it around digital transformation? And I'm going to address this to Umesh. Are you seeing now that you're, you're expanding geographically, you're expanding horizontally and vertically, but within the company, are you seeing a change in the types of people or who the actual buyers are?
Yeah, one of the fun things of being coached by somebody who's seen the movie so many times, especially John Chambers,
is that made a number of mistakes. You learn, for all of you in the room, you will develop more from your mistakes, you will your successes. It's so important to learn from them.
Yeah, so
I'll let you know when I failed in something.
Haven't been there yet, but you can drop me in there
still young.
2 years from now. John, this is Dan. I just made a mistake.
There'll be a hand signal.
Yeah. So when you look at a transition, Dan, of how this is changing, and as you look back in history, the last 15, 20, 30 years of every large technology trend which got caught on, whether it was the CRM or the ERP and other applications and mobile, it all caught the inflection point where it moved to business from IT or a specific vertical. When you look at the impact that something like a CRM has on the touch points in the organization, that's why you build large unicorn companies and so on. And so one of the things that we've been focused on for the last few years is to talk about business outcomes to business leaders, and not so much only restrict ourselves to customer service and IT. Those are important cogs in the wheel, but it's really about business outcomes. So think about this. We work with one of the world's largest fast-moving consumer goods company. And they had a light bulb moment when we were pitching to them and saying, we spend millions of dollars every year on doing focus group research with customers around the world to figure out what new products, what new sauce, what new chip to launch. And here are a couple of million calls of customers who are calling in, that they're calling for complaints, they're calling with questions. But this is volunteering feedback. Embedded in these calls is feedback about which of my products is getting their interest, good or bad, right? And so we had a brand manager at this company who launched a new kitchen sauce, and they had 5 flavors go out in the market. And out of the gate, they knew that not all of these 5 flavors would get interest from the consumers. But their typical process was wait for sell-through data, which one is selling more versus less, and then ramp up production on one and kill some of the others. And that's a process which takes 4 to 6 months. But this brand manager looked to us and said, let's do speech analytics to reduce that time to decision. How? Because the very next day when I launched the kitchen sauce, people call in. What are they calling in for? That the barbecue isn't sweet enough, the ranch isn't hot enough, etc. Embedded in this data is which of these flavors has interest. And so even a month of saving of that decision on what to ramp up versus not could change the whole market segment for them. So where I'm going with this is marketeers, brand leaders, sales leaders, in banks, risk and collection leaders, etc., are beginning to embrace the value of conversational analytics, conversational AI in driving real outcomes which matter to them. And as companies like Unifor do the effort of sort of driving that outcome and driving that focus, we will see the inflection point naturally take off, because now you'll suddenly have within the same organization 7x, 8x more users of the same product.
Yeah.
If I can just take it another step, One of the challenges the startups, how many of you are in startups in the room? How many of you are large enterprise companies? How many of you are in consulting?
How many are
Okay,
both?
so we got the blend. And this is really good because this way you can interface to each other. What every CEO is focused on, and I mean every CEO, I alluded to it in my opening comments, number one is innovation. They know they're not doing it fast enough, and they know, you might argue, is that 20% of their peers or 50% of their peers, large companies, will not exist in a decade. And it could be then if they don't innovate. Second thing is customer experience, because most companies have commodity-like products, even though we all like to think we're different, but most of them are commodity-like, whether you're dealing with cars or washers or almost any topic. And the major way you differentiate a commodity-like product is through the customer experience and the consistency of that and making it a good customer service brand. The CEOs, 80% of CEOs believe they provide a great customer experience in the way they're interfaced. The data says less than 10% does. So they are desperate for how they change this customer experience, not just from a productivity point of view, but an ease of use. And the third is security. Even though CEOs are hesitant about saying it too blatantly, they all know they have huge security issues. And they're trying to say, how do you perhaps combine all three of these? The challenge will be for the startups, you've got to figure in these enterprise customers you're facing to, do you go to the business lead, which is always the safest, because they usually have budget? Do you go to the chief innovation officer, where she or he is in charge of innovation in the company, but about less than 50% of the chief innovation officers really have power on it. They're often, you do innovation and you report 3 levels down from the president's a kiss of death on it. Or the chief digitization officer, about half of them have real power, but transformational, or their CIO. And so you've got to identify who the decision makers are, and then you've got to say, where is this relevant to the business leads and even to the CEO? If you can touch all those bases, regardless of which area of AI, speech recognition, security you're in, big data, then you're on your way. The mistake too many companies make as small startups is they are in a field that they're not able to articulate their differentiation, they don't have the go-to-market act together, and they're not able to say why this is important to a customer. I love what Umesh does in many phases, but I love how he tells customer stories, because it's able to say, here's the benefit.
Yeah, and they funded research we did on decision makers' criteria for adopting speech analytics, and I know we're talking a lot about speech analytics, and this is a conversational commerce conference. But what we've done 3 years of this tracking study, and the light bulb's starting to come on that there's a rich set of this classically unstructured data. They always talk about speech stuff, but it's speech and it's also chat. It's
all the above.
And that's the last time around, they were seeing business opportunities built around layering the analytics with decisioning, with informing live agents, all sorts of things that if you just think, oh, this is a speech analytics product, it seems sort of like a dead end, but it's so clear, or that there's a tug war between production and innovation, that's another kiss of death we see out there. And we're seeing less and less. We're seeing it going into production, being of interest to those business unit managers, and that's pretty cool. And moving out towards smart endpoints as well. That's the next thing that we have to start.
That's probably the 5 to 6 trend. Computing is moving to the edge.
Absolutely. Yes, questions?
We could challenge you?
Absolutely.
I'm not sure.
Now, where's the question coming from?
Oh yeah, stand up and we're going to get a mic.
We have a mic here,
Danny,
too.
we
Right
have
there. Now, this is a lesson I'm training my young CEOs on how do you handle tough objections.
Go head to head.
The first objection that comes from an audience, unsolicited, is usually going to be a tough question. So what you do is you buy for a second thinking what question he's going to ask. You walk back to the audience, the person's about to ask it. You basically, the closer you get, the harder it is for him to ask a really tough question. Then you go up and you grab your arm around him, firmly around the neck, and say, how am I doing so far? And what's your question?
Is this on?
Yes.
It's on.
Fantastic. This is a question for Umesh.
Okay. Yes! Cheers!
So now your opportunity to slowly walk.
We can do this
Actually,
from
I
here.
had 2 questions. I had a question first for you, and then a question about the innovation. The question for you, you mentioned the call center, the call wrap-up time, right? And the value of the input that you get on the call, right, itself. And one of the things we're looking at is, you do analytics across social media, right?
Yes.
Do you sell or think about the difference between the analytics that come from social media, where everything is public, versus the individual phone call, where it's our private conversation, and whether or not the feedback on that call is more realistic than the feedback that comes in the public social media?
So,
and just real quick, just my question for you, so you guys can just nail both
Hold
these,
that thought.
is on the innovation front, and I love what you said. I've been in technology for a long time too. The hardest thing that I have found is you get a product like you've talked about, right? And other parts of the enterprise look at it and start thinking about ways I could leverage it.
Yeah.
It's either really hard to tie into and leverage, or really expensive.
Ooh.
Right? And so those are my two questions.
got you. And I'm going to go closer to John, because even on the social media question, I know that there's a company in John's portfolio which does it. So I'm going to start by
I'm
saying,
glad you guys choreographed that so perfectly.
That was really good. That was funny, too.
so Bob, I'm going to start by saying that, the conversations and analytics on contact centers and conversations happening there versus social media are very different. That's my starting position. And they're different because I've always thought of the conversation at the contact center as the nearest to intimately meeting the customer at a branch or at their doorstep. That's one-on-one. You're speaking to the customer, and you're getting some feedback. Even that, go back to what I said five minutes ago. When a customer calls with a complaint or a suggestion, embedded in that is intrinsic value of what are they feeling about your product. Are they truly interested in your product, which is why they'll even complain or pay attention to how do I make it work, how does this plug into my home or office, etc. On social media, the filters are very different because you're not just talking to the enterprise, you're talking to the world while addressing something about the enterprise. So the filters that as an enterprise that you'll apply are very different from the filters you'll apply at the contact center versus very different when you and I are speaking in a cafe or at a branch, etc. And so which is why while all of us are in the omni-channel world and we look at data coming from various sources to learn from each other, I think there's a specialized science in each one. Another company in John's portfolio I'm going to introduce it, that's Sprinkler, and the CEO is again a good friend, a brilliant person. That's exactly what they do. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, and I think the point is real key. Most people you sell to in a company are measured on don't make mistakes and incremental improvement. And that was the way I was trained in business school and the way we trained business students until about a decade ago. Today, if you keep doing the right thing too long, an incremental improvement, you are roadkill. And so you've got to identify the people in the customer environment or the enterprise within your own companies who are going to take the risk, your risk takers in the group, the ones who have the power to do it, et cetera, which is why you often have to go to the business lead.
Correct.
Or if the digitization officer, he is really powerful, you can sell there and say, here's how you go after it. Out of my 16 investments, 5 of them are changing the customer experience. So to say that I think this is a huge field enabled by all the things we've talked about would be an understatement. And every CEO knows that's one of the 3 or 4 things they have to do differently on it. I actually believe the speech side contact centers will actually integrate with social media over time. But it's important to realize how far away we are. How many enterprise companies here in the room? How many marketing programs and startups and others do you have in your environment doing social media, cross-channel integration, et cetera? I'm guessing between 30 and 60 different companies. Is that fair? With no integration, which is scary. And then we all of a sudden start talking about your key contact centers with the speech integration. What do you do here? I think it is set up for somebody to tie it together. I clearly bet on Sprinkler because they do mining across 26 different social media platforms, and they can usually identify a trend well before it even shows up on somebody's website. And so you could see the problems at Wells Fargo with the issues of the bogus accounts if you were following 3 years before it became public, a problem here. And you can see when people are satisfied with your agents or quality, even before it shows up in your own quality surveys. But if you're able to say, how do these two concepts work together? How do you take the advantage of a live customer, which is nothing better than that?
You
and
gotta
how often
listen,
we all mess it up,
listen.
and we're measured by how quickly you get them off the phone, as opposed to did you really satisfy their needs, and were you able to sell them something subtly as you go forward? I think those will combine over time, but boy, that's a complex architecture. Now, I'm an architecture player as opposed to siloed products, but that will take some time. Those companies that get that right and perhaps work together loosely or tightly could go a long way, which I hope my portfolio companies
Absolutely.
would do, but that's the CEO decision.
So just to take that half a step forward is think about what Sprinkler is able to do is predict something that's happening on social, and if that feedback was already predictive available on the contact center rep screen in real-time analytics as the call steps in, and the rep knows that there's sort of a blowout of a certain issue, there's a trend, and he or she, without being trained, because there's a lead time of training, are coached by an AI system right on the call saying, this is how you maneuvered this issue because we just saw it pick up on the social. That's real power of omnichannel. But like I said, it's different filters you apply, and therefore you need different tools and technology, but they need to talk to each other.
And this is going to come up in a recurring way in the next day and a half. Katie, I think you had a question. We have a mic coming your way. But you know, I do want to say,
as long as I'm teaching techniques, one thing for the CEO to do is to say, don't worry about the mic, walk off to the person, ask the question, get the question out. If you don't like the question, since she didn't have a mic, you walk away, restate the question the way you want. So I'm kind of training how you do this. Now you're reversing roles. You're coming up and looking right in the eye.
Hi, Dan, thank you very much. I'm Katie McMahon from Soundhound, and I want to dovetail because I think you cropped a question that John Chambers answered in a way that surprised me, but I'm thinking about it. Is this actually working?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so the question was, what are your observations about enterprises' attitude towards working with startups? And we said, never in your career have you seen such now an appetite and hunger to work and bet on the startup. And then you dovetailed into, because of the innovation and the onward effect to collect millennial on an engagement level, which is huge. And I take that. That to me is a very offensive and a proactive move. What about the defensive? Because from our perspective, it's currently all about, I don't want my data with the giants, and I don't want my voice interface dependency on their technologies, which to the whole reason why our Accountify platform is becoming that company in consequence for the one independent alternative that has the full stack. So just something to think about. Any comments on that point?
Yeah, it's a complex one. We could probably spend the next 2 hours as a group going back and forth on it. But the elements are really good. I think it goes back to the things that have to override will always win, even though they're huge hurdles. You have to be able to combine your data, your view of your customer, your channels to your customers. You don't have any choice but to get there. Now, the people who make it easier without the risk of privacy, without the giants owning control of it and misusing that becomes key. Are the giants sometimes preventive of small startups that might be in their areas because they can make something a commodity and kill a startup on a rounding error in their earning? There is danger to that. And do the large companies have to do a much better job of listening to the legitimate concerns of their customers, the citizens, and of governments? The answer is yes. But I think in the end, the trends are inevitable. So it comes down to, in a free enterprise system, assuming government doesn't interfere for good or for bad, it's about who executes the best. But it's inevitable. You're going to use AI in a way that we never have. It's going to be 3 to 5 times the speed in the digital revolution than it was in the internet revolution, and it was fast. The danger with that, however, on job destruction versus job creation is huge. And it's why I personally am so passionate about startups. If we don't get the number of startups in this country up by 3 to 5-fold over this next decade, and the number of IPOs up by 3 to 5-fold where we are, we're going to have a huge unemployment problem. because we are in these large companies, not going to increase headcount much. If you're growing by 10% in a large company, how many companies are in this room are enterprise? How many of you are growing faster than 10%? So if you're not growing at least 10%, you give your employees a 3% raise, you give your shareholders 3% on productivity, and you then have about 3% to play with overall what you do for new ventures. It nicely says they're not going to add headcount. And so we've got to absorb that somewhere else. And this is where I think that ecosystem gets kind of exciting, but I am worried about the U.S. leadership on it. We're not leading anymore, and we need to get that back.
That's pretty profound. So the other takeaway I think as well is we just have to get better at listening.
Yes.
and you know, large or small, if the pendulum swings toward better understanding of what somebody is saying or thinking, that's another thing that's going to come up, is that we all speak very imprecisely, or we text imprecisely. We are aided by artificial intelligence in very profound ways. And to your question about, you know, how does social networking fit in? These networks have a way of bringing in a community of interest that's in the data and providing that feedback. So, you know, whether it's we need new standards or we need to have fewer proprietary ways of just capturing this stuff, that would be the rest of the story. But I want to segue, because this was great to have people engaged, but we're coming up on like 5 minutes left in this. Actually, we have 10 minutes. Are there more questions that we can, there we go.
My name is Prince, and I come from an enterprise and also have some experience with startups. You talked about innovation and CEOs feeling that they are not innovating enough, and CIOs coming in. Umesh, you talked about marketeers, other leaders basically innovating from your group. What I'm seeing is that innovation does not happen from top down. So going back to your question about who do you talk to, I still haven't figured that out, because innovation is a culture. If I hire a CIO and I say, go innovate, what does that even mean, right? So I don't even if I have a question here, but I think it's observation, and I feel that culture from bottom up, looking at big data, AI, speech, UI, they all have to come together to innovate. So just some thought around that, and you know, from your extensive enterprise background, if you can share a little bit on that.
So, you know, the thing that we are sort of observing in the market as we go sell these products and evangelize to them and so on, and I think a lot of what John's saying is true, that we've been in situations where we try really hard doing bottom up. That's a long sales cycle. We need the belief. The belief has to be top down. The innovation can be bottoms up, but I think the belief has to be top down, that, you know, unless we do some of this, unless we do artificial intelligence, unless we innovate, unless we disrupt our own self, then, you know, somebody else would come from behind and disrupt us. When the belief happens at the CEO level, that's a good place to start, because then everyone is messaged to look for those opportunities and so on. Some of the good customers that I enjoy working with is where the CEO is focused on saying, I want to disrupt my own company, because if I don't, I know that there's a startup that I don't know of, which is coming, and that will disrupt me. And so here are the processes that we do. What can we do in artificial intelligence or speech or chat or conversational, et cetera, to do this? One of the biggest industries that's going to get disrupted in the area that we're talking about, the BPOs, the business process outsourcers. Right. Like it or not, it's a $300+ billion industry. When Sundar Pichai of Google showed the demo of the Google Assistant calling a salon and booking, that was it. It's as natural as that. The technology is here. The AI is strong enough now for us to do some of those conversations really, and there's analytics feeding in and probably making it better than humans doing some of these conversations. So that's a huge industry getting disrupted. And so who are the best customers that I work with? The CEOs of these companies, because they see it coming. And rather than compete on that disruption, they want to partner and say, let's do it together.
You know, the point that you made, I think is an extremely good one, and I think it causes all of us to think. So I'm going to give you my reaction to it, but I reserve the right to evolve this answer over time. This change is happening so fast it really can't happen bottoms up. For large enterprises to transform their business, and you can't do it in silos at all. You've got to break down all the silos and move. For individuals in different groups going up through silos to try to get something done, it's going to be very unlikely they're going to be able to execute. Usually, especially for the startups that I advise, if you can't get a sponsor in the business units or digitization or at the CEO level who really wants to change their company dramatically, go on and sell to another company and get your references going, and then you can go back and sell that company. Unfortunately, and you all know the data, but let me use a country that will shock you, France, which is known as the last place you want to do business, terrible place to put headcount. Startups, the last place you go.
No offense, Nicholas.
Except that 3 years ago, I said France would become the startup nation of Europe because I saw the transformation occurring at Polytechnique, which is their MIT, Stanford, and that country. And their number of startups in the last 3 years have gone from 140 venture capital backed high tech to 740 at a time the US is actually decreasing. Out of Polytechnique, the top school, 80% of the students now want to go to startups, where it used to be 95 would go to government and businesses. So the startups are going to get disproportionately a larger share of the millennial, let's change the game type of approach talent. And in those startups, you can do bottoms up because often a CEO will empower them, but there's only, I hope, 2 layers in your organization if there's 3. So empowerment means that person can really make a difference on it. And I think it's then going to be an interesting give and take overall. But I think most CEOs know they have to change. They are scared to death of doing it because what will get you shot quicker than not doing innovation is taking risk, and you miss a couple quarters in today's world with shareholders having a very short attention span. The activists all over you very quickly after that. But yet the CEOs will lead, the Jamie Dimons of the world. Watch what Walmart does constantly. Watch what Satya does at Microsoft. They will constantly reinvent themselves. So it's going to be a fun give and take. 2 things I am sure of. The pace will be much faster than before. It will be about all about innovation, and the startups will play a role like they never have before.
Yeah. Well, it might not surprise you that Prince comes from the retail business. And actually, we're getting to the core.
So the retail sees it more than anybody.
Tell me. Right. All you need is Amazon sort of moving in and buying a grocery company.
Well, watch how quickly this occurred, because I was on the Walmart board. We saw Amazon coming.
Yeah.
And we moved. I mean, that company's amazingly well run, and we moved as fast as we could. And Amazon, it took them 21 years to pass the market capitalization, the value in the financial markets of Walmart. How long did it take Tesla to pass GM? 14 years. How long did it take Uber, with all of its weaknesses, automotive asset sharing, to pass Tesla? 7 years. 21, 14, 7. The next will be 3.5 to 4. So the CEOs instinctively know this who are good, and they're trying to navigate their way through it. And we as startups have to say, how do we do this in a constructive way that doesn't get our sponsors hurt in these accounts, has a higher probability of success, and still be realistic. He can be the best startup in the world, but his chance of success if he's world class is 70%. Every startup's chance of success is about 20. And so you have to realize this risk that go with this, and this is what I'm trying to do. People call me a VC. I'm really a mentor, a coach, a strategic partner, and my goal is, once I decide on the market transition and the CEO to bet on, is his success, and nothing makes me prouder than standing to the side and saying, I helped play a role there. But it's so long between these startups, but from the time they start to they go public. People forget Cisco went public at 70 million in sales. It's common
But that was a real 70 million.
Yeah, it was a real 70 million. But today it's much longer. And what the VCs and others miss, they don't have the operational experience to grow these companies, where they used to take them public earlier and an exit strategy and a different group of board members in. So that's part of the void I'm trying to fill.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, parting shot, mentee, what sort of advice would you be giving as sort of parting advice? Then we'll ask mentor and we'll see.
Well, I don't know if it's so much advice, but it's just the observation and the trend that we're picking up, is that the reason enterprises are buying and the reason startups like us are being successful is that we're delivering real value and not vanity anymore. So conversational commerce and conversational AI, a few years ago even, we spoke about it. A lot of it was vanity, but there's real value being delivered and testified, et cetera. Customer experience is not vanity. That's real value. That's the second point. And the third one is, if as an enterprise you're not innovating fast enough, you're going to be left behind. And if as a startup, we are not scaling fast enough, we're going to be left behind. So I have the challenge of the latter. We're seeing so much demand right now and so much opportunity with all the success that we have that, we are sort of putting strategy and learning from somebody who's done it. And John said it in the beginning, how do you press the accelerator all the way through? Is, we need to be ready for the scale because the inflection is here and it's happening. And the enterprises need to gear up as well to absorb that.
Absolutely.
Parting thoughts, challenges for the group. You've got to disrupt or you're going to get disrupted. I do not think it's a zero-sum game at all. I think if done right, it'll be just like the internet was in the US, where 22.5 million jobs in 8 years, 24% growth in per capita household income, 34% growth in GDP, et cetera. Except this one's going to occur faster, and we have not trained our young people or retrained workforce to realign for where the opportunities are going to occur. In your own environment, what will get you in trouble is actually doing the right thing too long. So have the courage to get outside your comfort zone, whether you're in a small company becoming big or a big company that is saying, how do we change as we go forward? And if it doesn't make you uncomfortable when you talk about your strategy and change, dream bigger as you go forward. Third, just a thought, and I'd love your feedback on it. I wrote a book at the insistence of my own team because I love to teach, and they finally said, John, you're not doing this on enough scale. So I wrote a book called Connecting the Dots. It'll be out here at the end of September. Umesh has read it. But it's really about advice in a startup world for digitization, regardless of where the leader is in government or business or startups. And I try to break it into chapters that you can look at in terms of how do you handle media, how do you do a startup, how you deal with your setbacks, key takeaways, what do most startups really ask the same questions. I'd love your feedback on it. I'm trying to do it on scale. But it's an honor. I love the way you've put this conference together with a unique combination of startups and enterprise accounts and media expertise. So thank you for your time today.
I'm flattered. And hearty thanks to you. Thanks very much.